Amazon procurement nerds are back. It is 2025, and I feel like the year is already crazy. And it's been, what, 2 weeks? So, one of the things that we did over the holiday is Dr. Eloise and I pulled our stats and said, how did things perform, different channels, what performed better than others. And one of the things that I think we both actually kind of thought was interesting is that our spider map episode that we did last year was our top performing episode by a long shot, actually. So if you listen to the spider map episode, you will definitely appreciate our conversation today. If you haven't, feel free to go back and search. We did an episode about the spider map. What is it? We also did a follow-up episode because we got several questions that came in. So we did a follow-up Q&A. So Dr. Eloise, the big news, which I want to dive into today, top performing episode. It's kind of what you're known for. Every quarter, you have this spider map, which has gotten a little bit unruly and kind of gives me a headache when I look at it.
But just by design.
You are getting rid of your spider map. And when you text me about this, I thought, wow, what the heck? We've got to do an episode about this. So let's start with what the heck.
It pains me to do this, but we have reached a new era, and I'm retiring it, more than sort of getting rid of it. And it may or may not take.
Sounds nicer than me saying you're canning it, you're throwing it in the trash, you're getting rid of it.
It has been, yeah, I am known for it. It's been remarkably helpful for me and others as well in what they have conveyed. But also, there are times when things change, and we are at the end of an era. And there's a corresponding article that I'll post, or by the time this comes out, it will have been posted. But it's time to move on to the next era. We had the suite era from a digital point of view. We had the great suite conflagration, shall we say. And then we had the SaaS procure tech space that emerged. And that was a reaction to the SaaS failures. Sorry, that was a reaction to the big S2P providers and the gaps that they left open. But now, and I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, we are in the midst, at the beginning of the AI revolution. And as such, I think it's going to create a lot of problems, or change, not problems. It's going to create a lot of changes in the SaaS, the procure tech market. And accordingly, we have to look at this in a new way. And I like to look at it from an architectural point of view. The spider map ultimately was changing the architecture of this closed loop suite to a more extensible architecture. But we're in the midst of another architectural change where we can leverage these really robust AI platforms. So yeah, I kind of have to retire it because we're in a different era now, and I don't want to be like Kodak or all those famous other companies that held on too long to
You mean
something that
Blockbuster? When I look at my
blockbuster.
Blockbuster card, I used to, in college, go rent movies from a
Yeah,
physical store.
exactly. So that's really why. I mean, that's the short answer. There's obviously a long answer under each of those things I just lined out, but yeah.
So, inferring or extracting on what you said a little bit, the reason you're retiring the spider map is you think there's a massive change coming to procure tech because of AI. And is it fair to say that many of the providers that have been listed in your spider map will either not be in existence or be completely different companies within the next 3 years?
So I call this the great bifurcation. And I think a couple of things are going to happen. So the next generation procurement platforms, which historically have been the orchestration platforms, the Zips, the Oros, the level paths, they are going to become the next generation procurement platforms. I don't think we can just go from where we are today to the agentic workforce. I don't think we can throw everything out. I don't think we should throw everything out. So you're going to have these next generation platforms really take hold, and where people will start to abandon or just turn off a lot of the modules of things they've paid for but haven't really used. And so we're going to just have this gradual migration to the new procurement platforms. And those new procurement platforms are going to sit on top of these robust AI platforms, Gemini, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. And that's where we'll build the agentic workforce. That's where we'll manage procurement transactions, et cetera, et cetera. So that bifurcation is the orchestration platforms absolutely will sort of be part of this future. The rest of the SaaS market, what's going to happen is some of them will evolve and become more agentic in nature, and perhaps even license agents to do or sort of be part of that newer ecosystem that I'm talking about. But it'll be in a much different way. It won't be a whole different data model that is then API connected into the stacks. It's actually going to be, I think, much more encapsulated as agents and sort of uh, licensed, shall we say, over. So I don't think immediately or even long term that the SaaS market completely obliterates. So if you're on that side, I don't. It's not. I don't see it as a problem. What I see is a recalibration, and the development of SaaS procurement tools will look a lot different, because no longer will you have to build the whole application logic and user interface, and it's going to focus much more on the core capabilities that wouldn't necessarily be present in either the AI platform or the newer procurement platforms.
So you have your spider map broken into, for lack of a better word, categories. So
Yeah.
direct, ESG, risk, contract management. How does that change over the course then with this new drive towards agentic platforms and agentic procure tech?
You're still going to have the capabilities. You still need to run sourcing events or run RFPs, analyze RFPs, create category strategies, execute category strategies, uh, SRM, P2P, all those things. What's different though is a lot of that logic will happen through agents, because we don't, and it'll be the agents that are transacting with these underlying platforms. And sort of to give you a perfect example, if you're using X, or if you're using Ariba or Coupa or iValue, it doesn't matter what you're using for transactional systems or S4 even. Interacting with those systems is horrible from a user experience point of view. So I don't need those providers to build all the logic and to do all the sophisticated stuff. I just need them to be able to transact at the end of the day. And so a lot of that logic analysis learning of the agents is going to happen upstream. And so over time, all these legacy players, and this is true of the big ones like SAP and Oracle, they're going to get hollowed out because the agents are going to do all the work, and we're going to put all the effort into designing the agents because we can do that with just English language. Shout out to Jason Bush. He talks about this a lot. The new coding language is English, and say, go log into SAP, do X, Y, and Z, and then come back. And I never have to go into the SAP system or really any other system. And that's the real big change here, which means now, and then over time, we don't need to spend a gazillion dollars with SAP or Oracle or Coupa or whomever. And that's where the power of these newer procurement platforms are going to come in because they're going to be tied into these really intelligent agents.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm looking I have your most recent spider map pulled up, which is from last year. I'm not sure what month this was actually released, but then you've got the center basis of the spider map, which is in purple, and you have that labeled platform, and everything's kind of pulling or kind of tying into that as the core center or the data foundation, right? So that whole model is almost like the AI becomes the center, right? It's like
Exactly.
center of the spider map that you have that is AI, and then you've got the different, I guess, 25% tasks that you can't program or tell AI to do then become the links to the center.
Exactly. And it's funny in the original versions of the spider chart, I had the center as AI hub
Mm.
as this sort of marker of what would come. I actually then moved away from it, thinking that it would be what it is today, but actually we're now going back to that sort of AI hub, and within that is going to be like I described. It is going to be the AI platforms themselves, but also the procurement platforms that sit on top of it.
So, what is the next version then of your and I don't want to call it a spider map because maybe that's not the right terminology then. I'm assuming in your mind you're thinking of building something that is AI focused, AI centric, and that will kind of map out how the firms in procurement are leveraging and using AI and what the differentiators are.
Yes. So, and again, I'll do this in two ways. And I have I'm working on a diagram. So it's going to start with the architecture, then a very simple logical architecture that sort of lines out what are the different components and where they come from. And then because it's always Spider Map's always been about the capabilities we have. It's the procurement value chain deconstructed, and we can then instead of looking at sourcing as one tool, looking at it as five tools or 10 tools. And now we will still need to do the same thing. And this is about okay, well, how do we get those same 10 sourcing capabilities it's actually going to be more sophisticated now because where we went from one sourcing tool to five, now we might go to 20 because you might have an agent for drafting the survey, an agent for sending and monitoring the questions, sorry, monitoring the survey that it went out. You'd have another agent to help Q&A, do Q&A on the RFP. You have another agent that does the analysis. You have another agent that pushes the data into either a sourcing system or back and forth negotiations with the supplier. Another agent that puts the details into a contract, et cetera, et cetera. So you could see that whereas it was all these sort of core capabilities around the spider map, now we're going to break those even further and start to look at them as do we have all those capabilities just in what I lined out? Do we need them? And so then moves to a capability matrix of have we built all the capabilities we need?
So, we talked about this in a previous episode, but selfishly, as you build out your new AI tracker, I don't have a better word for it right now. I would love for you to include information around pricing because I think that's going to be a little bit of the wild west and a little bit of the unknown is how are companies going to price and not price themselves out of the market where everything becomes free.
Well, and this is the difficulty here because now y- y- like procurement budgets have been very constrained and they're going to remain constrained. However, part of the reason they were constrained is because we had tied up all this money in the legacy systems, and we have all these procure tech systems that need to be fed as well. And now we're going to shrink the transactional legacy transactional systems and the procure tech solutions themselves are going to have to shrink because I don't need a whole full-blown app. What I need is an agent or some measure of a series of agents to do some task. So that what I'm paying for that's going to be a lot less, which is of course going to change. By the way, what I'm saying here is very, very controversial. So but I think we have to have this discussion now because otherwise we're all going to drive off a cliff. So the multiples that come back on these startups that they're going to change and they're probably going to decrease because I don't think you can still you spend $1 to $5 million a year on your legacy system and then buy hundreds of thousands of dollars of these point solutions. Like that math was not working. And now if I'm going to shrink the millions of dollars down to hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, and I'm going to take the procure tech from the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands. Like, I think I think it all, not that I want to, I'm not trying to devalue this. I'm actually pointing out that the amount to develop X widget isn't that expensive anymore. And so I think the prices, it is the Wild West, and I'd be the first to admit that it's going to be wildly different or significantly different. I don't know 100% how, but there's got to be value for the agents. And in fact, one might argue there's more value in the agent because you don't have to maintain all the other stuff. But a lot of this, I think, is still to be worked out. And
Well,
I'm not a pricing person
and the
anyway.
and the thing that comes to my mind is, well, usage-based pricing, but that becomes very complicated if
Yes,
you're using, 25 each person on your team is managing 20 agents, and how do
exactly.
companies differentiate, right? If they're all doing the same thing and they're all doing usage-based, right? Then it's like this nickel and diming. So I don't know. I haven't wrapped my head around how pricing will work for this at all.
And I'd be the first to admit that I'm not the best person to answer that question. But I know it has to change because, first of all, it's not working right now. But second of all, I don't need the SaaS provider to build a full on application. I need them to build core capabilities and components that will sit within, X, Y, or Z.
And then the usage model, I mean, the user model almost goes out the window,
Yeah.
right? Like, how do you do user-based pricing if you're doing some sort of, ChatGPT type model? And then
Yeah. The entire user base thing goes way out the bottom. I mean, I was, I was having issues with Carney's SAP system yesterday. And I was so frustrated, but I was also thinking, like, this whole user-based model goes out the window, exactly as you said. I'm like, wait, this doesn't make any sense anymore.
mhm. So you're going to be building some new model that's focused on AI at some point in 2025, I assume. What do you recommend for folks now who are listening to this going, "Wow, our procure tech landscape is kind of blowing up." And where should I turn? I mean, is there anyone even producing like a good relevant um, chart or something that you would recommend to folks now as you're starting to build out your own AI focused map?
Well, the answer's I haven't seen one, and I'm going to try to fill that gap pretty quickly. But I also think I'm not sure that we can define that gap because
Mm.
uh, there's going to take work for the SaaS providers to change. And like one of the things that I have been prattling on about is that we don't need CLM systems anymore. So, um, so why do I need CLMs on the spider map? We talked about this in the episode. I shouldn't even be highlighting that. And where I store my contracts is less relevant because I can just have it in some SharePoint, have all the contracts somewhere because I don't need to access them. I need my agent to access them. And so then the question becomes, who's going to create the agent that will then interrogate those contracts? I mean, pretty much now I can ask OpenAI to go do that on my behalf. And I could build an agent uh, to do that on my behalf in probably 2 hours, 4 hours. So then, like, I don't need CLM or any contract related stuff on the spider map. What I need is the capabilities lined out and to check the box to say that we have agents that can go do X, Y, or Z. But yeah, I just, I'm not sure a map is the right thing. This is where I've been struggling a little bit myself.
Yeah, it's like, how do you, in this new world in 2025, in this thing we're still calling Procure Tech, which maybe we'll come up with a new name. How do you visualize the new pivot and shift towards AI? Like, how do you actually map it out? That's a very valid question.
Right. And yeah. And I again, I'll say this probably for the 10th time. This will be controversial, no doubt, because there's a lot of money that's been invested. I have invested a lot in this current paradigm, but that doesn't mean it's not going to shift, and we got to get ahead of that.
Mhm. So we'll close out by saying adios to the spider map. We're
We're going to say thank you. You have
rest
done amazing work.
rest in peace and stay tuned for the new iteration, new version 2.0, 3.0 of the AI focused map. We'll just leave it at that. If you have ideas, thoughts, feedback for Dr. Eloise as she's starting to build out this AI centric vision for Procure Tech, please feel free to drop us a note on YouTube. You put questions, comments there. We do always review and respond quickly. You can also reach out to either of us on LinkedIn and we're happy to respond, but definitely open to feedback and input here as we're kind of tackling the unknown.
And by the way, be sure to read the article I posted on LinkedIn and to get more into this, and happy to answer questions or debate this. But we are in a brave new world on all fronts. And Sarah, we talked about in the last episode, even in the marketing front, it's all changing so quickly.
Awesome. Well, we will see you next Wednesday for another episode.